He had nothing but an envelope and a name. No badge, no weapon, no reputation anyone in that room would recognize. Just a worn jacket that smelled like diesel and old winters, and eyes that had already counted every exit, every face, every wrong thing about the three men pretending to belong. They laughed at him. The bodyguards, the investors in their tailored suits, the woman at the front desk who looked through him like he was furniture. None of them saw what he saw. None of them knew that in 12 minutes, someone in that ballroom was going to try to kill Victoria Sterling, and the man they just humiliated was the only one who could stop it. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, because I promise you, you don't want to miss what happens next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from tonight? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The cab dropped Nathan Drake 2 blocks from the hotel because that's all the closer he could afford, and he walked the rest of the way through a wind that cut straight through his jacket like it had a grudge. January in Manhattan was never kind, but tonight it felt particularly mean. The kind of cold that makes your jaw tight and your hands clumsy, the kind that reminds you that the city doesn't care who you are or what you used to be. He stopped half a block from the Sterling Crown and looked up at it. 42 floors of glass and limestone, the kind of building designed specifically to make ordinary people feel small. Warm amber light spilled from the lobby windows onto the wet sidewalk, and through the glass he could already see the shape of the evening. Women in floor-length gowns, men in suits that cost more than most people's cars, a string quartet positioned near the front entrance, playing something Nathan didn't recognize. Valets moved in practiced loops along the curb, parking vehicles that gleamed under the streetlights like they'd never seen actual weather. Nathan looked down at himself. Jeans. Work boots with a split along the left sole that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. A dark thermal under a canvas jacket that had been washed so many times the color had settled somewhere between navy and gray. He didn't look like a man who belonged anywhere near the Sterling Crown Hotel. He reached inside his jacket and touched the envelope. Still there, still sealed. Deliver it directly to Victoria Sterling. No one else. Don't open it, don't hand it off, don't leave it at the desk. Her hands only. That's what Marcus had told him 3 days ago in the back of a diner in Queens, sliding the envelope across a table sticky with old coffee rings. Marcus Hale, former intelligence analyst, retired, paranoid, in the specific way that men who spent 20 years swimming in classified information tend to become. They'd served adjacent operations in different branches, never the same unit but close enough that the bond stuck. Marcus had looked thinner than Nathan remembered, tired in a way that went past sleep. Is this legit? Nathan had asked, turning the envelope over. If it wasn't legit, I wouldn't be coming to you. I'm not in that world anymore, Marcus. I know. Marcus had wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. That's not why I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you because I don't know who else to trust with this. And because you're the best reader of a room I've ever seen in my life, and because something is very wrong around that woman, and she doesn't know it yet. Nathan had driven back to Brooklyn that night and sat in the kitchen for an hour after Emma fell asleep. His daughter's drawings were still spread across the table, horses, mostly, and one ambitious attempt at a giraffe that had gotten away from her somewhere around the neck. He'd looked at those drawings for a long time before he picked up the envelope and said, quietly, "To nobody, one more time." He crossed the street toward the Sterling Crown. The lobby doors parted automatically, and Nathan stepped inside, and immediately everything shifted. The cold fell away, replaced by warmth and the low murmur of wealth, the scent of something floral and expensive drifting down from arrangements near the check-in desk that were probably taller than Emma. The floor was pale marble. The ceilings were high enough to make you feel like you'd walked into something that was meant to outlast you. He moved toward the front desk, and the woman behind it clocked him in under a second. The smile she produced was technically a smile. It had all the right shapes, but her eyes had already made their assessment and filed their verdict. "Good evening," she said. "Can I help you?" "I need to get a message to Victoria Sterling. Ms. Sterling is currently hosting a private investor event. The 28th floor is not accessible to the general public this evening." "I understand that. I need someone to tell her Nathan Drake is here, and that it's important." The woman's expression didn't change, which was its own kind of change. "I can take a message and pass it along to the events coordinator in the morning. It can't wait until morning." She blinked. Sir, I really don't think... Is there a security desk? A manager? Anyone who can get a message upstairs in the next 5 minutes? She reached for her phone with the practiced patience of someone who'd handled difficult men before and had procedures for it. Nathan stepped back from the desk. He turned slowly, making it look casual, and let his eyes do what they'd been doing since he walked in. Running the room, cataloging, sorting. The lobby was busier than he'd expected for a Wednesday. Staff moving between stations. A cluster of suited men near the bar entrance who were clearly pre-gaming the event upstairs. 2 photographers with credentials around their necks waiting near the elevator bank. And 3 men who didn't fit any of those categories. The first was near the east corridor entrance, holding a maintenance clipboard that he hadn't looked at once. The second was seated in a lobby chair with a drink he hadn't touched, positioned with a direct sightline to the main elevator. The third was the one that bothered Nathan most. Standing near the rear service entrance in a uniform that was slightly wrong, the sleeves a 1/4 inch too short, the badge on the wrong side. They weren't looking at each other. That was the tell. When civilians pretend not to know each other, they try too hard and end up glancing across. Trained people do the opposite. They actively avoid eye contact in a way that becomes its own pattern if you know what to look for. Nathan knew what to look for. He was still watching the man near the service entrance when a voice landed on him from the right, like a hand slapped on a table. "Hey." He turned. The man was big. Not tall, but wide. The kind of wide that comes from a gym and a certain attitude about how space works. Mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing the fitted black suit of the Sterling Crown's in-house security team. The earpiece was visible. The expression was the kind that gets practiced in mirrors. Ryan Mercer read as head of something. Posture, positioning, the way the 2 other security staff nearby had oriented themselves slightly toward him without being aware of it. "You the guy asking to see Ms. Sterling?" Mercer said. "That's right." Mercer looked at him the way some men look at things they've decided are beneath them. Not with active contempt, but with a particular species of boredom that's worse. His eyes went from Nathan's boots to his jacket to his face and came back with their conclusion already written. "She's not available." He said it like he was closing a door. "I understand she's at an event. I need 5 minutes of her time. It's urgent." "It always is." Mercer tilted his head slightly. "What's your name?" "Nathan Drake." "You got credentials, Nathan Drake? Some kind of ID, business card, anything that tells me why I shouldn't just have you escorted out right now?" Nathan held his gaze. "I have an envelope that needs to go directly to Ms. Sterling. That's it. I was asked to deliver it personally." "Who asked you?" "Someone who had information she needs to see." Mercer's mouth did something close to a smile. "That's vague." "It's what I've got." Mercer turned slightly and addressed the 2 staff near him without lowering his voice, making sure the guests in the nearby seating area could hear clearly. "We got a delivery guy who thinks he gets a personal audience with the CEO." He looked back at Nathan. "What is that, some kind of gig economy thing? Somebody hired you to deliver this? What? On an app?" One of the suited men near the bar laughed. Not much, but enough. Nathan felt it. He didn't show it. "I'm not a delivery driver," he said quietly. "Then who are you?" "Someone trying to help." "Right." Mercer crossed his arms. "Look, man, I don't know what you think this is, but this is a private corporate event on 28. We have a guest list. We have credentialed staff. We have a security protocol that doesn't include whoever you are walking in off the street with a mystery envelope and a sad story." He glanced at the envelope. "And I'll tell you right now, whatever's in that thing, if it came from somebody legitimate, it would have come through proper channels. Not like this." Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then he said very evenly, "The man in the gray uniform near the service entrance. Check his badge." Mercer's brow shifted. "What?" "His badge is on the wrong side. Left chest, not right. Your hotel's staff protocol is right side. I counted 11 of your people in this lobby, and they're all wearing it right. He's the only one who isn't." Nathan paused. "Also, he's been standing in that exact spot for 22 minutes without moving, without checking anything, and without making eye contact with any of your staff. The man near the east corridor with the maintenance clipboard hasn't looked at it once. And the man in the lobby chair by the elevator ordered a drink about 16 minutes ago and hasn't touched it." Mercer stared at him. "3 men," Nathan said. "They're not together. They're working hard to look like they're not together. That's different. Silence held between them for a beat. Then Mercer laughed, short, dismissive, and turned back to his staff. Get a load of this. But there was something in his jaw that had tightened. I'm not asking for anything from you, Nathan said. I'm asking for 2 minutes with Victoria Sterling. If I'm wrong about everything, I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. Mercer looked at him one more time. Wait here, he said, with the tone of a man who'd decided this was going to resolve itself quickly and predictably. Nathan waited. He kept himself positioned with his back to the wall near a decorative column. Old habit, not dramatic choice. And watched the three men continue their performance of not knowing each other. The one near the service entrance checked his phone. The one in the lobby chair recrossed his legs. Micro-adjustments. Patience. These were men who'd done this before, who knew how to make time pass without looking like they were waiting for a signal. The elevator opened. A woman stepped out and Nathan knew immediately, even before the posture or the suit or the way the lobby staff subtly reoriented, that this was Victoria Sterling. She was younger than he'd imagined from Marcus's description. 30, maybe a year either side. She wore a dark blazer over a silk top, and she moved the way people move when they've spent years learning to take up the right amount of space. Not aggressive, not shrunken, just precise. Her hair was pulled back and one strand had come loose near her temple, which for some reason was the most human thing about her entrance. Mercer was at her side and talking in a low voice, probably giving her the condensed version. Strange man, no credentials, probably harmless, let's deal with it quickly. Her eyes found Nathan before she reached him. There was something in her face that surprised him. Not annoyance, not suspicion, but assessment. She was actually looking at him, reading him the same way he'd been reading everything else in that room. Mr. Drake, she said, and her voice was steadier than he expected. Miss Sterling, thank you for coming down. Ryan tells me you have something for me. I do. He held out the envelope. She reached for it, but Mercer was faster. His hand intercepted, fingers closing around it before Victoria could take it. Security protocol, Mercer said, without apology. Unknown items get screened. Ryan, standard procedure, Ms. Sterling. He tore the flap open with one finger and reached inside and pulled out the contents. Nathan watched Victoria's face as she saw Mercer go rigid. The photographs came out first. Surveillance quality, grainy but unmistakable. Service corridors on multiple floors. Ventilation access points. The loading dock at the rear of the hotel. Specific elevator shafts marked with handwritten notations. Then the second sheet, names, positions, timing windows. And the third, which was the one that changed the temperature of the conversation entirely. It was an internal email thread. Sterling Crown Security Division letterhead. The name at the top of the chain was Damian Cole, Director of Hotel Security. Mercer stood very still. Victoria took the papers from his hand. She read quickly, the way people read when the content is overtaking them. Her expression did something complicated. Not panic, but the look of someone whose mental model of their situation is being revised against their will. Where did you get these? She asked Nathan. Someone who'd been watching the situation for a while. Someone who didn't have a direct channel to you and trusted me to be one. Who? I'd rather not say right now. That's not Ms. Sterling. Nathan spoke quietly, angling his body slightly so the conversation didn't carry. I need you to understand that I'm not here to make a scene or create problems. I'm here because the information in those pages suggests that your event tonight is not secure and that the security failure isn't accidental. He glanced toward the papers. Someone gave very specific information about this hotel's layouts and protocols to people who intended to use it. And based on what I've been looking at since I walked through that door, I don't think the window is wide. She looked at him, long enough that it meant something. Then she turned to Mercer. Get Damian on the radio. I want him in front of me and… Ms. Sterling, Mercer said carefully. I think we need to be measured about this. One envelope from an unknown source, delivered by… He gestured at Nathan with a precision that was meant to be insulting. This. That's not actionable intelligence. That's… The man near your service entrance, Nathan said to Mercer, keeping his voice level. The one I mentioned. Is he on your roster tonight? Mercer's jaw worked. Because he's been watching the elevator that leads to 28 for the last 20 minutes, and the man who came in to replace him 2 minutes ago is wearing the same wrong side badge. Victoria looked at Mercer. Something in Mercer's face shifted. Not into belief, not quite, but into the particular discomfort of a man whose certainty has developed a crack it didn't have before. Pull the guest list, Victoria said quietly. Cross-reference all maintenance and contract staff checked in tonight. Do it now. Mercer looked at her, then at Nathan. Then he reached for his radio. Nathan turned back to the room and found the third man, the one in the lobby chair, and discovered that he'd moved. The chair was empty. The untouched drink sat alone on the small table beside it. Nathan scanned quickly. East corridor. Service entrance. Bar entrance. Stairwell door near the far wall. The stairwell door was still moving. He said without turning around, "Ms. Sterling, we need to move you somewhere that isn't an open lobby." She was already looking at him. "What did you see?" "One of the three I flagged has changed position." "Where?" "Stairwell, toward the upper floors." She absorbed this. 2 seconds, maybe 3, and then she said, "All right, talk to me." And Nathan began to explain exactly what he'd seen, and what he thought it meant, and what the photographs in her hands told him about how the night had already been planned for weeks before he ever walked through the door. Upstairs, 28 floors above them, 300 guests ate and drank and laughed, and a string quartet played something light and seasonal, and the chandeliers threw warm light across a room full of people who had no idea that the evening they were standing inside had already been designed to end in a very different way. Nathan Drake had delivered his envelope. Now he had to figure out how to stop what came next. The security office was a room that had been designed to look more important than it was. A wall of monitors showing camera feeds, a long desk with 2 laptops and a radio console, motivational framed prints that nobody had actually chosen, just ordered in bulk. It smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Nathan sat in one of the chairs without being invited and spread the photographs from the envelope across the desk, while Victoria stood with her arms crossed and Mercer stood near the door doing a bad job of pretending he wasn't rattled. "Walk me through it again," Victoria said. "Not a request." She had the tone of someone who'd learned to ask questions twice because people tend to leave things out the first time. Nathan tapped the first photograph. "These are your service corridors, floors 6, 12, and 27. Whoever took these shots knew exactly where the camera blind spots are. See here." He moved his finger to a circled notation in the margin. "This is a gap in your northeast corridor coverage that's maybe 40 feet long. Any standard security sweep would catch someone moving through, but if you're timed right, you've got a 12 to 15-second window clean." "How do they know the timing?" Victoria asked. "Because someone told them." He moved to the second page. "These attack routes aren't improvised. They're specific. 3 entry points, 2 fallback positions, a primary extraction path through the loading dock." He looked up at her. "Loading dock access is a keycard system, right?" "Yes." "And your authorized keycards, how many people have them?" Victoria turned to Mercer. Mercer's jaw was doing the thing again. 12, he said. 14, counting Director Cole's administrative access. 14 cards, Nathan said. And someone put the dock's specific door code on this document. He turned the page so she could see it. That's not a guess. That's not a hack. Somebody walked up to a keypad, read the numbers, and passed them along. The room sat with that for a moment. Victoria unfolded her arms and picked up the email printout again. She'd already read it twice. Nathan had watched her eyes track across the same lines both times, the way you read something when part of you is hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less bad. "Damien's name is on 3 of these," she said. "It's at the top of the chain. Damien Cole has been with this company for 9 years. Nathan didn't say anything to that. He understood it. 9 years was weight. It was history. It was the particular kind of trust that accumulates slowly and feels like certainty. It didn't change what was on the paper, but he understood it. "People change," he said finally, and even that felt insufficient. He tried again. Or maybe they were always pointed in a certain direction, and it just took 9 years for the right situation to come along. Victoria set the paper down. She looked at it for a moment like it had said something rude to her. Then she said, "Where's Damien now?" Mercer pressed his radio. Waited. Pressed it again. "Damien, you copy?" Static. "Cole, what's your 20? Nothing. The 3 of them understood what the silence meant without saying it out loud. Nathan stood. How many floors between here and 28? We're on 3, Mercer said. So, 25 floors. What does your elevator camera coverage look like right now? Mercer moved to the monitor wall and pulled up the feed. They looked together at a grid of 12 camera views: lobby, service corridors, stairwells, 2 of the upper floors. 28 was visible in the upper right corner. The ballroom feed showing the gala in progress, guests moving through the warm light, waitstaff with trays, the band still playing. Everything looked fine. That was the part that bothered Nathan most. It always looked fine until the moment it didn't, and by then fine was already a long way behind you. Show me 27, he said. Mercer clicked through. The 27th floor corridor appeared, empty, well lit, the kind of institutional quiet that hotel hallways have after hours. Except, stop, Nathan said. Go back 4 seconds. Mercer scrubbed the feed. There. Nathan put his finger near the screen, careful not to touch it. At the far edge of the frame, barely visible where the corridor curved, a shadow moved against the wall and then disappeared. 1 person. Maybe 2, moving tight. That's maintenance access, Mercer said, and his voice had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The dismissiveness was gone. What was left sounded like a man trying to recalibrate without admitting he needed to. That could be staff. At 8:47 on a night when every staff member should be either in the ballroom or in the service areas below? Nathan looked at him. Call it. Mercer held his gaze for a second, then reached for the radio again and switched channels. All units, I need a welfare check on 27, Northeast Corridor. Any available, report in. He waited. Anyone on 7 respond. Silence again. Not static. Silence. The difference between a channel with nobody on it and a channel that's been blocked is subtle but real, and Nathan caught it the same moment Mercer did, because Mercer's hand tightened on the radio. They're jamming the secondary channel, Nathan said. That's... Mercer stopped himself. Recalculated. That takes equipment. Yes, it does. Nathan moved toward the door. Which means this isn't 3 guys in a lobby. This is organized, it's resourced, and it's already further along than we'd like. Victoria hadn't moved from where she stood. She was watching the ballroom feed on the monitor. All those people in their expensive clothes, talking and laughing and not knowing anything. And her face had settled into something very still, the way faces go when the mind behind them is working hard and doesn't have the bandwidth to spare. I have 300 people upstairs, she said. I know. Board members, investors. The mayor's deputy chief is up there. A woman who just had her 2nd kid 8 weeks ago. I know. What do we need to do? Nathan's answer was immediate, because he'd already been building it since they walked into the room. We need to do 3 things right now, in this order. First, get a message to every security staff member you can physically reach, not over radio, in person, and have them quietly start moving guests toward the interior of the ballroom, away from the windows and the main entrance. Make it look like a routine shift. Second, get local law enforcement on the line, not through a radio or a hotel line, through somebody's personal cell, because if they're jamming channels, they may have the front desk lines monitored too. And third, he looked at Mercer. We need to find Damian Cole before he finds us. Mercer absorbed this. Nathan could see the internal negotiation happening on his face. The part of him that had spent the last half hour feeling defensive and wrong-footed, pulling against the part of him that was a professional and recognized that the situation had moved past pride. My personal phone, Victoria said, already pulling it from her jacket. I'll call Detective Hargrove directly. He's been a contact of mine for 2 years. He'll answer. Good. Nathan turned back to the monitors. Mercer, I need you to show me every camera you have between here and Damian Cole's last known position. And I need your honest read. How many of your staff do you trust completely right now? As in, you'd bet everything on them? Mercer pulled up the camera grid and sat down at the console. He was quiet for a moment. The real kind of quiet. Not evasive quiet, but the kind that means someone is actually thinking. Henderson, he said finally. Ewan, probably Park, although she's green. He paused. 3. Okay, 3 is workable. Nathan pulled a chair up beside him. Start with the east stairwell. Show me every floor from 20 down. What the camera showed over the next several minutes built a picture that was worse than Nathan had hoped. and not quite as bad as he'd feared. Two separate camera feeds on floors 19 and 22 had been physically redirected. The housings were still in place, but the lenses had been tilted to show ceiling and wall instead of corridor. Someone had done it carefully, during a window when nobody was watching, and done it well enough that a casual monitoring check would have missed it entirely. How long would that take? Victoria asked, off the call with her detective contact, watching over their shoulders. 2 minutes per camera if you know what you're doing, Nathan said. Less if you've practiced. When would they have had access? That's the question, isn't it? He sat back. The envelope I brought. One of the documents showed a building access timeline. There were entries noted for this past Saturday, 3 days ago. Victoria's jaw tightened. We had a private event Saturday. External catering staff. 40-something contractors cleared through Damien's office. The name sat there between all three of them. He cleared them himself, Mercer said. Not a question. He already knew the answer, and knowing it was doing something to him. Nathan could see it in how he was holding his shoulders, a subtle, rigid quality that comes when you realize someone you worked beside every day was something entirely different than you thought. 9 years, Mercer said quietly. Yeah, Nathan said. He didn't elaborate. There wasn't anything useful to add. Victoria's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Hargrove. He's moving. Says 20 minutes minimum for response units. 20 minutes. Nathan ran it against what he was seeing in his head. The positions of the three men in the lobby, the shadow on 27, the jammed channel, the redirected cameras. Someone had timed this operation. The gala had a schedule, and that schedule was public information. The main program started at 9, which put the keynote address at 9:30, which put the maximum concentration of attendees in the largest, least easily evacuated space at around 9:40. He checked his watch, 8:53. We have about 40 minutes before this reaches whatever they're planning as the trigger point, he said. Hargrove's 20 minutes gets him here with maybe a forward unit. That's tight, but it's workable if... He stopped. If what? Victoria pressed. If we don't do anything that accelerates the timeline. He looked at her. The risk right now is that if they have anyone watching, and they probably do, any visible law enforcement approach, any sudden change in the event flow upstairs, any sign that we know, they move early. Early and uncontrolled is worse than late and planned. So we do nothing for 20 minutes? We do invisible things. He turned back to Mercer. You're 3 people. Can you get Henderson's up to 28 right now without using any radio communication? I can text him directly. Do that. Tell him to find a quiet way to start shifting the crowd away from the north side of the room. Make up a reason. Food stations relocating, whatever sounds natural. And I need him to identify and softly monitor any staff member up there he doesn't personally recognize. Mercer was already typing. Done. UN, where is she right now? Loading dock area. She was doing a routine perimeter. Get her back inside and away from the dock. If that's the primary extraction path, I don't want our people near it until we're ready. He turned to Victoria. Your event coordinator. Is she someone who can keep her composure if you tell her something's wrong? Linda? Victoria thought about it with the honesty of someone who actually knew the person rather than what they wanted the person to be. She'll panic for 30 seconds, and then she'll be fine. Linda's been through hard things. Call her, quietly. Tell her there's a security concern, and you need her to keep the program running exactly as scheduled. No announcements, no changes, nothing that signals anything to the room. Can she do that? She'll do it. Good. Nathan stood and moved to the center of the room, turning slowly, running through it. The envelope, the photographs, the corridors, the 3 men, the silence on the radio, Damien Cole not answering, the shadow on 27. Something wasn't sitting right, and he needed to find it before it found him. He picked up the email printout again and read the bottom of the chain. The oldest messages, the ones that had started the conversation. The language was careful, heavily coded, using project management terminology that was just a half step off from normal corporate communication. Anyone scanning it casually would have read it as a scheduling thread, but the last entry in the chain was different. It was shorter than the others, sent from a different device based on the formatting metadata, and it said only, confirm window, asset confirmation pending your visual. Asset confirmation, Nathan said aloud. Victoria looked at him. What? This last message, asset confirmation pending your visual. That's not operational language. That's authentication language. Before they move, someone needs to visually confirm something. He looked at her. Or someone. She stared at him for a beat. Me. You're the event host. You're on a schedule. At some point tonight, the program calls for you to make an appearance, address the room, be visible. And whoever is running this operation is waiting for visual confirmation that you're in the ballroom before they move. The room understood this simultaneously. If I go up there, Victoria started, if you go up there on schedule, it might trigger the action before Hargrove arrives. Nathan set the paper down. And if you don't go up there, whoever is watching will know something has changed, and they'll either abort or accelerate, and we lose the controlled window either way. So what do we do? Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. His left shoulder ached. It always ached when he'd been tense too long, legacy of a dislocation in 2019 that had healed mostly right. He thought about Emma at home, probably in bed by now, Mr. Rabbit tucked under one arm the way she slept since she was 3 years old. He pushed that aside. You go up, he said, exactly on schedule. On, stay visible, stay in the center of the room away from windows, and do not, under any circumstances, look like you're waiting for something. Victoria's expression was steady. Whatever she was feeling under the surface, she'd decided to keep it there. And you? I'll be somewhere else. Where? He picked up the photographs again and looked at the service corridor layout, the map of the hotel's hidden skeleton, the arteries behind the walls, the maintenance routes that connected floor to floor in ways the guest-facing architecture didn't advertise. He found what he was looking for after about 15 seconds, a service access route from the 3rd floor up through a freight corridor that branched on 17 and again on 24. There's a route here that doesn't appear on the main camera grid, he said, showing Mercer. Is this current? Mercer leaned in, his mouth pressed together. That's the freight shaft system. Older part of the building. They were going to renovate it 2 years ago. It got deferred. The cameras in there are on a separate system. He paused. A system that Damien managed. So those feeds may already be compromised. Probably. Nathan folded the photograph and put it in his jacket pocket. Then that's where I'm going. Alone, Victoria said. It wasn't a question, but it was pointed. Mercer's 3 people are better used upstairs keeping 300 civilians from panicking, and you need Mercer with you. Mercer turned from the console. He looked at Nathan with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance from where it had started an hour ago. You're not armed, he said. No. You're walking into a building full of armed professionals who've had 3 days to prepare. That's about right. Mercer reached inside his jacket and unclipped something from his belt. He held it out, a collapsible steel baton, the kind security staff carry when they need something less lethal than a firearm and more decisive than their fists. Nathan looked at it. Take it, Mercer said. I've got a backup. He said it quickly, the way you say something before you can reconsider it, and Nathan recognized that for what it was. A man doing the right thing before his ego could talk him out of it. Nathan took it. Thank you. Don't thank me, just... Mercer stopped, started again. There's a woman up there who's been with the company 6 years. Her name is June Alcott. She's 43, she's got a kid in college, and she laughs too loud at her own jokes. He said it like it mattered, because it did. Bring her home okay. Nathan clipped the baton to his belt. I'll do what I can. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back to Victoria, who was watching him with something in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Not quite fear, not quite trust. Something in the space between the two. Ms. Sterling. Victoria, she said. Just like that. No preamble, no ceremony. Like they'd known each other longer than 45 minutes in a crisis. Victoria. He almost smiled. Didn't quite get there. Stay in the center of the room. If anything changes, anything at all, you find the nearest interior wall and you put it at your back. She nodded once. You do the same. He moved into the corridor, past the front desk where the woman who'd assessed him earlier caught his eye and then looked away, and he went toward the freight elevator at the rear of the lobby. The door opened to a space that smelled like industrial lubricant and old concrete, the utilitarian guts of the building, the part that kept everything above it running and received none of the credit. The light was fluorescent and flickery. The floor had a metal grate surface worn smooth in the middle from years of carts and equipment. He pressed the button for 17 because the photograph had shown a branching access point there, and because going directly to 27 was what they'd expect if they expected anything. The elevator ground upward. Nathan stood in the moving box and breathed slowly and let himself be still for exactly as long as the ride took. In those few seconds between floors, he thought, briefly, about the letter he'd written for Emma 2 years ago when he'd been doing security consulting in a situation that had gotten complicated. The letter he'd sealed in an envelope and given to his neighbor, Mrs. Chung, with instructions about what to do with it if he didn't come back. He'd taken it back from her 3 weeks later when everything resolved. He'd never thrown it away. It was in his kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. The elevator stopped at 17. The doors opened to darkness. Nathan stepped out and waited, perfectly still, for his eyes to adjust. The freight corridor was narrow, maybe 5 feet wide, and it ran in both directions with the particular blankness of spaces that were never meant to be seen. A single emergency light at the far end threw a thin red glow. He heard something. Not close, 2 floors up, maybe 3. A low metallic sound, brief, like something being set down on a hard surface. Could have been anything, could have been nothing. He started moving. Above him, unseen through concrete and steel, and 28 floors of polished hospitality, 300 people ate dinner and drank champagne and made conversation about real estate and quarterly returns, completely unaware of what had been built around them. The band had moved into its second set. The lighting in the ballroom had warmed as the evening deepened, the way event lighting does when it's trying to make a mood rather than illuminate a space. Victoria Sterling was in the elevator, rising toward 28, her phone silent in her pocket, her face arranged into the expression she'd learned to wear for rooms full of people who needed to believe everything was fine. And somewhere in the hidden architecture of the Sterling crown, Damian Cole was waiting. He was a careful man who had spent 9 years building the kind of trust that makes betrayal possible. He had chosen his moment with the patience of someone who had never intended to stay. The development project, $2.3 billion in commercial real estate rights. The deal Victoria had spent 4 years assembling was the kind of thing that changed the shape of a life entirely, if you could get your hands on it. He'd spent 9 years making himself the kind of person whose hands nobody would check. What he hadn't planned for was the envelope. What he hadn't planned for was the man in the weathered jacket who'd walked in off a January street with nothing but his eyes and a decision to be somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Nathan moved through the dark corridor toward the sound he'd heard, the baton cold and solid against his hip, the photograph folded in his breast pocket, and he didn't think about what came next. He thought about what was directly in front of him, the next corner, the next floor, the next breath. That was how you stayed functional when the margins were thin. One thing at a time, until there were no more things. He reached the stairwell access on 17 and pulled the door open inch by inch, testing the hinge for noise. It was quiet enough, not perfect, good enough, and put himself on the stairs, moving up. 18, 19, 20. On 21, he heard voices. He stopped. 2 men, close, just on the other side of the stairwell door. Not shouting, not whispering, the conversational tone of people who think they're unobserved. Still no confirmation from the lobby unit. Cole said to hold until the window, 9:40, not before. Cole's not answering. A pause. He doesn't need to answer. The plan's the plan. Nathan pressed himself flat against the wall beside the door and listened, breathing through his mouth to avoid noise, and cataloged everything in the voices, cadence, accent, the quality of their certainty. These were not nervous men. They were the kind of men who'd been paid well enough that the job felt routine. You think somebody made the guys downstairs? Possible. Mercer's not an idiot. He kind of is, though. A short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Either way, it doesn't change the timeline. Our positions are set. The loading team's confirmed. A pause. When Sterling takes the podium, we move. That's the trigger. Victoria. Victoria taking the podium at 9:30 was the visual confirmation they needed. The moment she stood at that microphone in front of the room with her back to the window, that was the signal. Not her presence in the ballroom, her presence at the podium. Visible, still, contained, her attention forward. Nathan looked at his watch. 9:11, 19 minutes. He had 19 minutes, and he was on 21, and Damian Cole was somewhere above him. and there were at least two armed men on the other side of this door, and three more he'd identified downstairs, and however many others he hadn't. He breathed. He thought about the layout from the photograph. The freight corridor continued from 21 up through 24, and there was a service junction on 26 that fed into the ballroom service entrance on 28. If he went up instead of through, he could get above their position without going through the door. He turned and started climbing again, softer than before, because now the space above him had real content, and the margin for noise had gotten considerably thinner. The stairwell light on 23 was out, burned or disabled. Nathan didn't waste time deciding which. And he moved through the dark by feel, one hand trailing the wall, counting stairs with his feet. He reached the door on 24 and opened it to a service junction that smelled like cable insulation and something chemical, cleaning products maybe, stored in the utility closet on his left. The corridor branched here. Left went toward the front of the building, guest rooms, elevators, the parts of the hotel that existed for people to see. Right continued toward the rear service track that climbed to 26. He went right and came almost immediately face to face with a man in a maintenance uniform who was coming around the corner with a radio in one hand and an expression of absolute surprise. They both stopped. The man was quicker to recover. He had the radio up and his mouth opening before Nathan had fully processed the encounter, and Nathan moved on instinct, 3 steps, closing the distance before the transmission could complete. His hand on the radio, his elbow in the man's throat, controlled, not brutal, enough to stop the voice without doing permanent damage. The man went down hard and quiet. Nathan crouched over him, checked his pulse, steady, and took the radio, scanning for the frequency. He found it. 7 voices on the channel, brief confirmations, the clipped language of an operation in progress. He pressed the radio close and listened, and in the pieces of transmission he caught over the next 90 seconds, the full shape of what Damian Cole had built came into focus. Not just tonight, not just this building, but the months of groundwork that had made tonight possible. The contacts, the buyers, the offshore structure that the signed documents would feed into. The plan wasn't just to steal the project. It was to make Victoria Sterling sign it over herself, under duress, in a way that would be difficult to unwind because her signature would be genuine. Coercion wasn't legally simple to prove after the fact, especially when the people who'd witnessed it were the ones running the operation. Nathan stood, checked his watch again. 9:17. 13 minutes to the podium. He started moving faster. He came through the service junction on 26 moving fast and quiet and found the freight access that fed up into the ballroom level, a narrow concrete passage with pipes running along the ceiling and the smell of whatever the kitchen had been preparing for the last 4 hours drifting down from above. The stairs here were metal grate, same as the freight elevator, and they rang faintly under his boots despite his best effort. He slowed, put more weight on the outside edges of each step where the flex was less, and climbed. The service entrance to 28 was a plain steel door with a push bar. Nathan stopped just below it, put his ear close to the gap at the bottom, and listened. On the other side, the controlled murmur of a catered event in its later stages. Silverware, soft conversation, a microphone being tested somewhere near the front of the room, one of the audio staff doing a quiet level check. He checked his watch, 9:22, 8 minutes. He pressed the door open 4 inches and looked through the gap. He was at the rear service corner of the ballroom, behind a partition screen that had been set up to separate the catering staging area from the guest space. Through the gap between screen panels, he could see the room, the tables, the warm light, the 300 people who were finishing their dinners and resettling in their chairs as the program prepared to resume. He scanned for Henderson. Mercer's man, the one he'd texted to, quietly began shifting the crowd. Nathan found him near the center of the room, standing with the particular stillness of someone who was actively tracking the space while trying not to look like it. He'd moved a cluster of tables back from the north windows. Not far, maybe 6 feet, framed as a catering adjustment. Subtle enough that nobody had complained. Good man. Nathan scanned the rest of the room and found the other faces he didn't want to see. Maintenance uniforms, 3 of them, positioned near the room's main entrance, the kitchen service door, and the northeast corner respectively. They were early. The trigger was supposed to be Victoria at the podium at 9:30, but these 3 were already in position, which meant either the timeline had moved or they'd been instructed to embed before the signal. Both possibilities were bad. He pushed through the door and moved behind the partition screen, staying low and out of sight lines. A catering staffer, a young woman with a tray of empty champagne flutes, saw him and started to say something, and Nathan held one finger to his lips and showed her his palm in a gesture that said, "Stay still, stay quiet," and she read it well enough to freeze in place with wide eyes. "Service issue," he said, barely audible. "Keep doing your job. Don't look at me." She nodded and moved away on slightly unsteady legs, which Nathan understood completely. He got himself to the edge of the partition and looked toward the front of the room where the small raised platform served as the event stage. The podium was there, the Sterling Group branding behind it, the audio setup, the event coordinator Linda standing to the side with her tablet and an expression that was doing considerable emotional labor to stay neutral. And Victoria was walking toward the stage. She was on schedule. Of course she was. She'd said she would be, and she was the kind of person who did what she said. She was moving through the room, greeting people as she passed, a hand on an arm here, a brief word there, the performance of normalcy so convincing that Nathan felt a brief, complicated admiration for it. The man near the northeast corner shifted his weight. Nathan watched his hands. The right hand had dropped to his hip, not touching anything yet, but the muscle memory was there in the set of his shoulder. 9:24. 6 minutes before the original trigger. They were moving early. Something had changed in their calculus. Maybe the lobby situation, maybe the absence of radio contact with the man Nathan had put down on 21. Operational plans are like any other kind of plan. They hold until they don't, and then everyone improvises, and improvisation under pressure is where things become genuinely dangerous. Nathan needed to reach Henderson without crossing 30 feet of open ballroom floor. He looked at the layout. The tables created a broken path toward the center of the room if he moved along the east wall, using the seated guests as visual cover for most of the distance. Not clean, but possible. He moved. He stayed low and used the gaps between the draped tables, keeping his profile below the sight lines of the three positioned men. And he was halfway across the room's east perimeter when everything stopped being a calculation and became something else entirely. The lights went out. Not all of them. The ballroom had emergency lighting that kicked in after a 2-second delay, washing everything in a dim amber that turned the elegant room into something that looked like the aftermath of something. But in those 2 seconds of complete darkness, 300 people made 300 different sounds that together added up to a single unmistakable noise, the start of panic. "Everyone stay calm." A male voice, amplified. Someone had gotten to the microphone. Not Victoria, not event staff. The voice had a flat, professional quality that belonged to someone who'd given instructions in high-pressure situations before. "This is a security matter. If everyone remains seated and cooperative, no one will be harmed." The panic that had been starting upgraded itself. People were standing, chairs scraping back. A woman near the window table made a sound that was halfway between a question and a scream. The mayor's deputy chief, Nathan had clocked him earlier, 2 tables from the stage, was on his feet with his phone out and his face doing the thing that happens when powerful men realize they're not in control of a situation. Nathan was still moving. He reached Henderson and grabbed his arm from behind, and Henderson spun with his hand going to his belt before he registered who it was. "It's Drake," Nathan said, 1 inch from his ear. "How many are you seeing?" Henderson was breathing hard, but his eyes were working the room. "3 in here. There's a 4th who just came through the main entrance. One of the kitchen staff just went down. I don't know if he's fine or he isn't. We deal with what we can see. The woman, Linda, event coordinator. Where?" "Stage left. Henderson squinted through the amber light. "She's still there. She hasn't moved." "Good. Your job right now is to get yourself between those north window tables and the guests seated there and keep them low and moving toward the interior. Do that and nothing else. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Go." Henderson went. Nathan straightened and got his first clear look at the room's new configuration. The 4 men had dropped the maintenance pretense entirely and were moving with purpose, 2 of them converging on the stage area where Victoria had stopped mid-approach when the lights cut out. She'd done exactly what Nathan had told her, put her back to an interior wall, and she was standing with her shoulders squared and her phone in her hand, and even from across the room in bad light, Nathan could see she was recording. Smart woman. The man near the stage reached her first, and Nathan was already moving, pulling the baton from his belt and extending it in one motion, and he crossed the distance between them in the time it took the man to put a hand on Victoria's arm. Nathan's first move was the wrist, controlled, two-handed, the baton catching the inside of the joint at an angle that created immediate involuntary release without breaking anything. The man made a sharp sound and pulled back and turned, and Nathan was already past him, positioning himself between the man and Victoria. "Don't," Nathan said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried something in it that louder words often don't. The particular quality of a voice that has said stop in situations where stop was the last option. The man looked at him, recalibrated, made the decision that Nathan expected him to make, which was to produce a radio and call for backup rather than engage directly, and Nathan let him, because the radio would tell him exactly how many voices were on the operational channel, and because the 30 seconds it bought gave him time to look at the rest of the room and understand what was happening. What was happening was organized but already straining. The four men inside the ballroom had expected the lights to do more psychological work than they were doing. 300 panicked guests create a very different crowd dynamic than 300 compliant ones, and this crowd had not chosen compliance. People were moving toward the exits in clusters, the way crowds do when the fear becomes directional. Staff members were trying to redirect them. The man at the main entrance had his hands full with a surge of about 40 people who'd collectively decided that door was their best option. The fourth man, the one Henderson had flagged coming through the entrance, was moving toward the stage with the deliberate stride of someone who'd been given a specific objective and intended to complete it. He was looking at Victoria. Nathan moved to intercept, but the room was between them, and the crowd was moving in confused currents that didn't care about his trajectory. He shouldered through a gap between tables, caught his hip on a chair that someone had abandoned sideways, stumbled, lost a full step. And by the time he recovered, the fourth man was 8 feet from Victoria and closing. What Nathan hadn't seen was Ryan Mercer. Mercer came from the left, from the service door that Nathan had come through earlier, which meant he'd been in the freight corridor behind Nathan the entire time and had made his own decision about where he needed to be. He put himself between the fourth man and Victoria without a hesitation, and Nathan registered, in the brief fragment of a second he had to observe it, that Mercer's face looked nothing like it had in the lobby 2 hours ago. The performative confidence was gone. What was left was something rawer and more real, genuine determination, the kind that doesn't care how it looks. The collision between Mercer and the fourth man was messy and graceless and effective. They went into a table together, taking a centerpiece and 2 water glasses with them. Mercer came up with his elbow in a position that suggested he'd done some training that went beyond what the hotel's security contractor had provided. Nathan reached them and put the fourth man down with a precision that was less dramatic than it looked, a specific pressure point application on the neck and shoulder junction that creates a brief, overwhelming signal that the brain interprets as stop functioning. The man dropped. He'd be fine in 3 minutes. Nathan didn't have 3 minutes to wait and see. Mercer was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. Not badly, but the kind of bleeding that looks worse than it is and gets everywhere. "You followed me," Nathan said. "Yeah." Mercer pressed his sleeve to his forehead. Figured it couldn't hurt to have someone watching the rear approach. He said it with the clipped defensiveness of a man who'd done the right thing and wasn't entirely comfortable admitting the impulse. "Good call." Nathan turned to Victoria, who was still against the wall, still recording, her eyes moving between the downed man and Mercer and Nathan with an alertness that had not diminished 1 degree. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at her phone screen. "I'm getting everything. Keep getting it. We're not done." Because they weren't. The room was still chaos. Guests crowded near exits, the remaining 3 operational men somewhere in the ballroom, the communication channel still active in Nathan's pocket. And Damian Cole had not appeared. Damian Cole not appearing was the detail that was pulling at Nathan like a loose thread. A man who had built 9 years of cover inside this company, who had designed this operation with enough specificity to redirect cameras and jam radio channels, and place his people 3 days in advance. That man was not standing in a parking lot somewhere waiting for a phone call. I was here, in this building, and he was watching, and he was waiting for the ballroom situation to resolve in whatever direction it resolved. Because the ballroom had never been the point. The development project, the documents, the signature. Nathan grabbed Mercer's arm. "The thing they actually need from her isn't in this room." Mercer looked at him. "What?" "This. Nathan gestured at the ballroom, the chaos, the downed man, all of it. This is the distraction. You throw four men into a room with 300 panicking guests. You generate enough noise and confusion that you can move one woman somewhere else, somewhere quiet, and take your time doing what you actually came to do. Mercer's face went through several things quickly. Cole's not here. No. Then where? The radio in Nathan's pocket crackled. A single transmission, different from the operational chatter he'd been monitoring. This one was a direct channel, two voices only, and the second voice was a woman's. Nathan pressed the radio to his ear and listened. Damian Cole's voice was calm and almost conversational. I want you to understand that I have no interest in hurting you. What I need takes 10 minutes, and then this is over. And Victoria Sterling's voice, except it wasn't Victoria next to Nathan. It wasn't Victoria against the wall with her phone. Nathan's head turned and the wall was empty, and Mercer was already saying her name like a question, turning in place. Because while the ballroom had been erupting, while Nathan and Mercer had been dealing with the fourth man, while every eye in the room had been pointed at the loudest version of the crisis, Damian Cole's people had walked Victoria Sterling out a side door. Nathan was already moving toward the service exit. Behind him, Mercer shouted something to Henderson. Instructions, the law enforcement timeline, something useful. But Nathan was through the door and back in the freight corridor and running, because the radio transmission had carried a specific acoustic signature he recognized, the low hum and concrete echo of an underground parking structure. The loading dock. The primary extraction path. It was in the photographs. He hit the freight stairwell and went down. Not the way he'd come up, that was too slow. Taking the stairs 3 at a time in the near dark, using the railing to control his speed on the turns, his left shoulder burning where he'd hit the table corner in the ballroom. 4 floors. 6. The sound changed as he descended below grade, the building's mechanical hum thickening, the air temperature dropping. He came through the sub-level door into the parking structure and stopped. The Sterling Crown's underground garage was 3 levels, with the loading dock on the lowest. At this hour it was mostly quiet. The guest event had brought valets to the street level, not here. The lighting was the fluorescent industrial kind, half of it cycling in a slow flicker that did nothing useful. Cars sat in neat rows. The smell was exhaust and concrete and the particular cold that accumulates underground. Nathan moved toward the ramp that led to the lower level, staying close to the concrete pillars, keeping his profile narrow. He heard them before he saw them. Damian Cole's voice again, still measured, still almost reasonable. It's a transfer of project authority, that's all. Sign the document and we walk away. No one gets hurt. You've got armed men in a room full of my investors. Victoria's voice was tighter than it had been upstairs, but it was still there, still functional, still hers. A situation that resolves itself the moment you sign. Everyone goes home. You've been planning this for how long? 9 years? Or did the plan come later? A pause. The plan evolved. Right. She said it like she was taking notes. The Meridian development. That's what this is about. $2.3 billion in project rights. Transferred to the right entity structure, with the right documentation. It's essentially untouchable. Cole's voice had a quality in it that Nathan was cataloging. Not quite pride, but something adjacent. The specific tone of a man explaining something he'd spent a long time thinking about. Your signature on the transfer document is the legitimate piece. Everything else is accounting. Nathan reached the top of the lower ramp and looked down. He could see them, a pool of light around a parked van near the loading dock bay. Cole stood to the right, a man Nathan hadn't seen before standing to his left with something in his hand. Victoria was in front of them, still upright, her posture refusing to be smaller than it was. A folding table had been set up with a single document on it and a pen. Nathan counted. Cole. The man with the weapon. One more near the dock door. A third, partially visible from this angle. 3. The baton against 3 armed men in an open space with a hostage was not arithmetic that favored him. He needed the calculation to change before he engaged. He took the radio from his pocket, the operational channel, and pressed transmit. He said nothing, just held the button for 3 seconds and released. On the channel, he'd heard the men upstairs using a 2-click confirmation. He did it now, 2 short transmissions, the pattern they'd been using for position checks. Below him, the man near the dock door reached for his radio, checked his channel, Press transmit twice back. He'd confirmed to a ghost. Nathan moved down the ramp while the man's attention was on his radio, staying in the shadow of the parked vehicles, and he was 12 feet from the man before the boots made enough noise on the concrete to register. The man turned and Nathan closed the distance in 2 steps. The baton went to the back of the knee joint, dropping him, and Nathan's elbow came down once on the base of the neck, controlled, and the man was on the ground before he'd made a sound louder than a sharp exhale. 1. Cole heard something. Not the takedown, but the absence of the sound he'd been expecting from that direction. He turned, and his face in the parking structure light went through surprise and then into something harder and more dangerous. "That's enough," Cole said. He wasn't talking to Victoria anymore. "Nathan Drake." Cole said it like he'd had it ready. "Marcus Hale's errand boy." "Something like that," Nathan said, stepping into the light. Cole was 51 years old and looked it, silver at the temples, the kind of face that had started authoritative and settled into something more weathered. He was wearing his director's uniform still, his credentials around his neck, 9 years of identity that had now become just a costume. The man to his left had a weapon leveled, but Cole made a small gesture with one hand and the weapon dropped to a low ready. "You've complicated my evening," Cole said. "Yeah, I've been told I do that." "The ballroom situation is over. My people up there are going to—" "Your people up there are on the floor or running," Nathan said. "Hargrove's units are probably in the building by now. You've got a very short window, and you seem like someone who knows when a window has closed." Cole looked at him for a long moment. "The document." Cole gestured at the table. 10 minutes. That's all I needed." 9 years, Victoria said from where she stood. Her voice had a controlled fury in it that came from somewhere below the professional surface. 9 years, Damien. I gave you everything, every access, every trust. You were at my father's funeral. Cole's jaw shifted. Something moved across his face, not quite guilt, but the ghost of a feeling that had once been guilt and had been processed into something else over a long time. "This isn't about you," he said, and the tragedy of it was that he clearly believed that. "Everything you built here is on paper you stole from her," Nathan said. "It doesn't matter how clean your structure is. The document she signs under these conditions will get unwound in court in 6 months. That's my risk to take." "Is it?" Nathan held his gaze. "Because from where I'm standing, you've got a weapon on me, a witness who's recording everything, law enforcement 2 minutes out, and a man on the ground behind you who's going to have questions about the last 3 hours when he wakes up." Nathan let that land. "Or you put the document away, and you walk out of here, and you get the running start that going quietly will give you. Because if your people upstairs start talking, and they will, the window for walking is going to be very small." Cole's second man was watching the exchange with the professional attention of someone who evaluates situations for a living. Nathan saw the micro shift in his stance, weight redistributing, shoulders dropping a degree. The math was changing for him. "Rios," Cole said, to the man with the weapon. Rios didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. Cole looked at Victoria, and for a moment his face did something Nathan hadn't expected. It went briefly, genuinely tired. 9 years is a long time to carry a plan. 9 years of performing loyalty while building an exit. Whatever had driven him to it originally, money, resentment, opportunity, some combination that had seemed reasonable in the beginning and had calcified over time into simply the thing he was doing, it had cost him something too. You could see it, if you looked. Nathan didn't feel sorry for him, but he saw it. "Victoria," Cole said. Not Ms. Sterling. Her name, the name of someone he'd actually known. "The project is good work. It always was. I just wanted—" He stopped. Didn't finish it. "I know what you wanted," she said. Cole picked up the document from the table. He looked at it once. Then he folded it in half again, and he put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at Rios. Rios lowered the weapon to his side. "I'm going to—" Cole started. He didn't finish that sentence either because the parking structure door at the top of the ramp burst open with the particular organized energy of law enforcement entry. 3 figures, tactical vests, weapons up, voices giving commands in the overlapping cadence of a practiced team. Detective Hargrove was behind them, a step back, his badge out, his eyes scanning down the ramp. Cole stood very still. The kind of still that is itself a choice. A man deciding how this ends and choosing the version where nobody else gets hurt. Rios put the weapon on the ground and raised both hands. Nathan put his own hands up and took a step sideways, creating clear space between himself and the two men, and called up the ramp. Two individuals, one on the ground, weapons on the floor. He kept his voice flat and loud enough to carry. One civilian unhurt. Hargrove's team moved down the ramp with the methodical speed of people who'd done this in worse conditions. Hargrove himself followed, and when he reached the bottom, he looked at the scene. Cole, Rios, the unconscious man, the folding table with nothing on it anymore, the pen still lying where it had been placed. And then he looked at Nathan, and his expression said several things at once, most of which translated roughly to, "I'm going to need a very detailed statement." "Detective," Victoria said from where she stood. "Ms. Sterling." Hargrove's professionalism assembled itself quickly. "Are you injured?" "No." "Is there anything on that table I need to know about?" Victoria looked at Cole. Cole reached into his jacket and produced the folded document and held it out to Hargrove with both hands, the gesture of a man who has run out of options and is choosing the only remaining form of dignity. Hargrove took it, looked at Cole. "Damien Cole." "Yes." "I'm going to need you to turn around, sir." Cole turned around. Nathan lowered his hands and felt the full weight of the last hour arrive in his body all at once, the shoulder, the hip, the accumulated adrenaline metabolizing into something that felt like standing in water. He breathed. Let it move through him. Victoria came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything immediately. Thought as much. He pulled out his notebook. Old school. Actual paper. Start wherever makes sense. Nathan started at the beginning. The diner in Queens. The envelope. The weathered jacket. The lobby of the Sterling Crown on a January night. And the three men who didn't belong. And the woman at the front desk who'd looked through him like furniture. Above them, on 28 floors of glass and limestone, the Sterling Crown Hotel was beginning the slow, complicated process of returning to something like order. Guests were being guided to a secure staging area. Staff were accounting for everyone. Henderson had his hand on June Alcott's shoulder and was saying something that made her nod repeatedly with her eyes closed, the particular nod of someone who needs to hear that it's over before they can believe it. Ryan Mercer was sitting in a chair near the ballroom service entrance with a first aid kit open beside him and a paramedic pressing gauze to the cut above his eyebrow. He looked like a man who'd been through something. He looked, for the first time all evening, exactly like what he was. Not a performance of authority, just a person who'd made some decisions under pressure and was living in the aftermath of them. He'd made the right ones, at the end. That mattered, even if nobody would frame it and put it on a wall. Down below, in a parking structure that smelled like exhaust and cold concrete, Nathan Drake finished the short version of the evening for Detective Hargrove and then stood quietly while Hargrove wrote the last of it down. The pen scratched against paper. Somewhere above them a radio crackled and was answered. The fluorescent lights cycled in their slow flicker, indifferent to everything that had happened under them. Cole was in handcuffs in the back of a police unit. The document was in an evidence bag. The operation that had been 9 years in the building had lasted about 40 minutes past the point it was supposed to work, which was how it usually went. Elaborate plans hold until the first thing goes wrong, and then everything after is improvisation, and improvisation favors the people who don't need a plan to function. Nathan's arm had stopped bleeding on its own. He looked at the dried edge of it for a moment, the body's ordinary competence, the way it just keeps repairing itself whether you ask it to or not. Then he followed Hargrove up the ramp toward the light. The statement took 90 minutes. Hargrove was thorough in the way that good detectives are thorough. Not aggressive, not performative, just patient and precise, circling back to specific details with slightly different phrasing to see if the answers changed. They didn't. Nathan had spent enough time in debrief rooms to know how to give a clean account, chronological, specific, without interpretation layered on top of what he'd actually observed. He left the interpretation to Hargrove. They sat in a corner of the hotel's second-floor conference room that had been requisitioned as a temporary command post. Around them, the organized machinery of a multi-unit law enforcement response moved through its procedures. Evidence bags, witness interviews, the quiet radio traffic of people accounting for everyone and everything. Nathan drank 2 cups of bad coffee and answered every question and signed the statement when it was typed up and placed in front of him. Hargrove clicked his pen closed. You understand we may need you back in for follow-up. I'm not going anywhere. You live in Brooklyn. Yeah. Hargrove looked at him with the particular expression of a detective who has interviewed a lot of people and has developed a feel for the ones who are telling the full truth versus the ones who are telling the useful portion of it. Whatever he concluded, he kept it to himself. You've got my card, he said, and stood. Nathan sat for another minute after Hargrove left. The coffee was terrible, and he drank the rest of it anyway because his hands needed something to do. His shoulder had settled from acute pain into the dull, persistent complaint that he'd learned to ignore years ago. The cut on his arm had been cleaned and taped by a paramedic who'd asked 3 times if he was sure he didn't want to go to the hospital, and Nathan had said yes 3 times with diminishing patience. He thought about Emma. It was past 11. Mrs. Chung next door would have checked in on her around 9. That was the arrangement on nights Nathan had to be out late, which were rare enough that Mrs. Chung always answered with a warmth that said she didn't mind. Emma slept hard and didn't wake easily. She was fine. He knew she was fine. He pulled out his phone and texted anyway. Everything okay? Mrs. Chung's reply came in 40 seconds. Your girl's been asleep since 8:30. Checked twice. She's good, Nathan. He set the phone down and let out a slow breath. Across the room, through the glass partition that separated the conference area from the corridor, he could see Ryan Mercer. Mercer was standing against the wall with his arms crossed and a butterfly bandage above his left eyebrow, talking to one of Hargrove's detectives. I was answering questions with the attentive precision of someone who understood the situation had moved entirely out of the register where posturing was useful. And in that understanding, he looked, Nathan thought, more like a real security professional than he had at any point during the previous 4 hours. The detective finished with Mercer and moved away. Mercer stayed where he was, and after a moment he looked through the glass partition and found Nathan looking back. And they held that for a second. 2 men who'd met badly and ended somewhere different. And then Mercer gave a short nod. Nathan returned it. That was enough. Neither of them needed to make a speech about it. Victoria appeared at the conference room door at 11:23. She'd lost the blazer somewhere. She was in the silk top now. A small streak of something on the cuff that might have been coffee or might have been from the parking structure floor, and her hair had come down from the careful arrangement it had been in at the start of the evening into something less structured and more honest. She looked like someone who had been through a significant amount and had come out on the other side still standing, which was exactly what she was. Hargrove says you're done, she said, for tonight. She came into the room and sat across from him, which surprised him slightly. He'd expected a brief exchange in the corridor, the formal gratitude, the handshake, the end of it. Instead, she sat down and folded her hands on the table and looked at him the way she'd looked at things all evening, so actually looking, not performing the act of it. How's your arm? She asked. Fine. You keep saying that about things. They keep being fine. She almost smiled. It arrived and departed quickly, the way things do when the emotional context is too complex for a full smile to feel appropriate. I've been giving statements for the last 2 hours, she said. Hargrove's team, the hotel's insurance coordinator, 3 board members who needed personal reassurance that the company wasn't exposed, a PR person who appeared from somewhere and whom I've never been more annoyed to see in my life. How are the guests? Shaken. A few people with minor injuries from the crowd surged near the exit. Nothing serious. June Alcott twisted her ankle. She paused. Henderson stayed with her the whole time. He's a good person. Mercer picked well. Victoria looked toward the partition where Mercer was now standing alone, looking at his phone. Ryan's different than I thought, she said. I've known him 2 years. I thought I knew the shape of him. People are more than the shape they lead with. Apparently. She was quiet for a moment. I recorded Cole's confession in the parking structure. The whole thing. His voice, the document, the context, everything. Hargrove has it now. That's going to matter. My lawyer says it matters considerably. The recorded admission of the document's coercive intent basically neutralizes any legal argument that the transfer was voluntary. She said this with the flat precision of someone who'd already had the conversation with the lawyer and processed the implications. The Meridian project is protected. Good. $2.3 billion, Nathan. I've been building that for 4 years. Every piece of it. She stopped. Started again, differently. My father started this company with $40,000 and a lease on a 3-room office in Midtown. He died 6 years ago. The Meridian development was the first thing I built that was entirely mine. Nothing inherited, nothing his. Entirely mine. She looked at her hands. Cole knew that. He'd watched me build it. He knew exactly what he was taking. Nathan didn't say anything to fill the silence. He understood, in the way you understand things when you've also built something from scratch and had it threatened, that the money was almost beside the point. What Cole had been trying to steal was something that had cost her in ways that didn't show up in a financial summary. I'm sorry he was who he turned out to be, Nathan said. 9 years is a long trust to lose. Yeah, she said it simply, without dressing it up. It is. They sat in the quiet of the conference room while the activity moved around them, the organized unwinding of a law enforcement operation. The hotel staff beginning the slow work of restoring the 28th floor to something other than a crime scene, the outside world slowly becoming aware through various channels that something had happened tonight at the Sterling Crown. Marcus Hale, Victoria said. The person who sent you. Yes. Is he in danger? If Cole's organization had reached beyond tonight, Marcus knows how to not be found when he doesn't want to be found, Nathan said. He'll know it resolved. He'll surface when he's ready. I'd like to thank him. I'll tell him. Victoria leaned back slightly. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Nathan. What do, day to day, when you're not walking into hotels with envelopes and preventing corporate coups? The phrasing surprised a short sound out of him that was close enough to a laugh. I consult. Security assessment, mostly. Occasional work for a firm that does risk analysis for mid-sized companies. He paused. I pick my daughter up from school at 3:15. I cook dinner most nights. I'm slowly losing a war against a broken fence post in the backyard. How old is your daughter? 7. Victoria nodded. Something in her face was genuinely interested rather than politely so. What's her name? Emma. Does Emma know what you did tonight? Emma knows that Daddy had a work thing that ran late. He picked up the empty coffee cup and set it back down. That's the version she gets. And the real version? The real version is the same either way. There was a situation. I helped. I went home. He looked at Victoria. That's all it ever is, really. Somebody needs something done, and you can do it, so you do it. The rest is just details. Victoria looked at him for long enough that it went past the length of a casual look. You know, though, that's not how most people think about what you did tonight. Most people weren't there. I was there. She said it quietly. I was in a parking structure with a man who had 9 years of planning and nothing left to lose. And you came through a concrete ramp in a jacket that cost less than my pen, and you... She stopped. Chose her words more carefully. You didn't hesitate. Not once. Not in the lobby, not in the ballroom, not downstairs. Most people, even people who are trained and paid and equipped, they hesitate. There's always a moment where the self-preservation instinct runs the calculation. I hesitated on the ballroom floor, Nathan said. I caught my hip on a chair and lost a step. If Mercer hadn't come through that service door when he did, the fourth man reaches you before I do. She looked at him. You're telling me that to be honest or to make me feel better about Mercer? Both, probably. She considered this. Fair. The conference room door opened and one of Hargrove's team leaned in. Ms. Sterling, the DA's office has someone on the line who'd like to speak with you tonight if you're available. Victoria stood. She picked up her phone, then looked back at Nathan. Don't leave yet. It wasn't a question. He stayed. She was gone for 40 minutes. Nathan used the time to walk the corridor once, partly to move his body, partly old habit, checking exits and positions, even when there was nothing left to check. Hargrove's team had the building in hand. The remaining mercenaries, the ones from the ballroom who hadn't been incapacitated, had been detained in the lobby, zip-tied, and accounted for, looking considerably less purposeful than they had 2 hours ago. Cole and Rios were already in transport. Nathan found Mercer near the elevator bank, still alone, looking at something on his phone with the expression of a man not actually reading what's on the screen. How's the head? Nathan asked. Mercer touched the bandage automatically. Paramedic says it won't need stitches. Just looks bad. He put his phone away. I've been giving statements for 2 hours. Same. Mercer was quiet for a moment. The elevator bank hummed. Down the corridor, two of Hargrove's detectives were talking in the low, efficient cadence of people wrapping up a long night. "I owe you an apology," Mercer said. Nathan started to deflect it, and then didn't, because Mercer had clearly been building toward this, and deflecting it would be its own kind of condescension. "Okay. The lobby. The way I handled you." Mercer's jaw worked. I was a man who wasn't comfortable with this particular kind of conversation, which made the fact that he was having it mean more. "I sized you up in about 4 seconds and decided I knew exactly what you were and exactly how much weight to give what you were saying, and I was wrong about both." He paused. "Those 3 men you flagged, I'd walked past all of them, more than once. I didn't see what you saw." "Different training," Nathan said. "That's generous." "It's accurate." Nathan leaned against the wall beside him. "Your training is for visible threats in a controlled environment. Mine was for invisible threats in environments that are actively trying to kill you. That's not better or worse, it's different. Tonight was the second type." Mercer looked at him. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, it's just specific." Nathan thought about how to say the next part without it landing wrong. "What you did in the ballroom, putting yourself between the 4th man and Victoria, that wasn't training. That was decision. Those aren't the same thing." Something shifted in Mercer's face. Not dramatically. He wasn't a man who wore things dramatically, but enough. "June Alcott," Mercer said. "Henderson stayed with her." "I know. I talked to her before the paramedics took her to check the ankle." He paused. "She told me Henderson wouldn't leave her side the whole time. She said she wasn't scared because he kept talking to her, just talking, telling her about his daughter's soccer game last weekend." Nathan nodded. "That's not in any security protocol I've ever written," Mercer said. "No," Nathan agreed. "It's not." They stood there for another minute in the comfortable enough silence of 2 people who didn't need to fill space with words, which was its own kind of progress from where the evening had started. Victoria found Nathan at 12:40 in the morning, back in the conference room, his jacket on, ready to leave. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee that were significantly better than the ones from the urn at the command post. Someone had produced a proper machine from somewhere, and she set one in front of him without asking. "DA's office," she said, sitting. "They want the recording, the printed email chain, and a formal deposition from me within the week. They're looking at conspiracy charges, extortion, corporate fraud, and about 4 other things I've already forgotten." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Hargrove thinks with the recording and the physical evidence from the hotel, Cole's attorney is going to advise him to take a deal." "Probably." 9 years, she said again. Not the same way she'd said it before. This time it was less about the loss and more about the strangeness of it, the sheer duration of a deception. "I keep coming back to the timeline. He started planning this, or at least started being receptive to someone else's plan, years ago. And every day in between, he came to work. He did his job. He came to my father's funeral and stood in the rain and put his hand on my shoulder and said..." She stopped. "He said he'd been with the company long enough to consider it family." Nathan didn't try to make that less than it was. "Sometimes people hold 2 things at once," he said. "The real relationship and the plan running underneath it. I don't think that means the relationship wasn't real. I think it means people are more complicated than we want them to be." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's just true." She looked at him. "You're very honest. It's easier than the alternative. Most people don't think so. Most people are wrong about that too." She almost smiled again, and this time it made it a little further before it settled. She drank her coffee. Nathan drank his, and it was considerably better than the previous 2 cups, and he appreciated it more than he had expected to. "I want to offer you something," Victoria said. "You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't owe you. That's not what this is." She set her cup down and was precise about this in the way she was precise about things that mattered to her. "I'm rebuilding the entire security division, top to bottom. Cole had 11 years total with the company, 9 as director, and I have no way of knowing how deep the rot goes until I audit every process, every access credential, every protocol he built or approved or modified." She paused. "I need someone to do that audit. Someone who has no pre-existing relationship with the division, no loyalty to the way things have been done, no career investment in finding anything other than the truth." Nathan looked at her. "And after the audit," she continued, "I need someone to help rebuild it, not manage it. I'll find a director for that. but someone who understands what a security architecture should actually look like when it's built for the right reasons. She held his gaze. Chief security consultant. You set your own hours within reason. You stay completely out of any public-facing role. No press, no investor communications, no company events where you'd be visible. You work how you work, and I don't interfere with that. She paused. And you're home at 3:15. The 3:15 detail landed with a precision that told him she'd been thinking about this for more than the last 5 minutes. He looked at his coffee. He thought about the security consulting work he did now, the risk assessments, the mid-sized companies with their competent enough arrangements and their comfortable blind spots. It was work that kept the lights on and kept him home at 3:15 and rarely asked anything of him that cost him sleep. Tonight had cost him sleep. Or it would, once he got home and the adrenaline finished clearing and his brain started processing the full inventory of what he'd walked into and what could have gone differently. But it had also been the first time in a long while that the work had felt fully real, not just competent, real. I have conditions, he said. I assumed you would. The audit is honest regardless of what it finds. If I find things that are difficult for you, processes you approved, gaps you should have caught, it goes in the report exactly as I found it. Agreed. No publicity. Not a word about tonight. Not a word about who I am or what I did here. If anyone asks why the security division is being rebuilt, you found process gaps during a routine review. Already planned on it. I'm a consultant, not an employee. I work the scope we agree on, and I'm not on call for things outside that scope. Fine. And I want Marcus Hale compensated for the intelligence he gathered. He took a risk getting that information and getting it to me. Whatever that's worth to you, that's between you and him. Victoria considered this last condition for exactly 1 second. Done, Nathan nodded. He looked at the table, then back at her. Okay. Okay, she said. They finished their coffee in a quiet that had earned itself, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said the necessary things and don't feel the need to pat around them. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does at 1 a.m. in January. Still moving, still lit, indifferent to individual events, carrying 10,000 stories simultaneously with no particular interest in any of them. Nathan put his jacket on and stood. He picked up the empty cup, looked around for a trash receptacle, didn't find one, and set it back on the table. Thank you for the coffee, he said. It was the least available option, Victoria said, and this time the smile completed itself. He walked out of the Sterling Crown at 1:07 in the morning through the main lobby doors, past the front desk where the woman who had looked through him had long since been replaced by the night staff, past the spot near the east corridor where the man with the maintenance clipboard had stood, past the lobby chair where the untouched drink had sat. The valets were gone. The string quartet was gone. The street was quieter than it had been, and the cold had deepened the way January cold does after midnight, getting into everything. He walked 2 blocks to where he could catch a cab going east, his hands in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in the air, the baton still at his hip because he'd forgotten to return it to Mercer, and Mercer hadn't asked for it back. He'd mail it to the hotel, or bring it when the work started. There was time. A cab stopped without him having to do much to flag it. He got in and gave the Brooklyn address and settled back against the seat. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime version. The lights different, the streets less populated but never empty, the bridges ahead and the water below them dark and flat. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered it. "This is Marcus," the voice said. Nathan exhaled. "I know. How long have you had this number?" "Couple days, burner. I heard through some channels that things resolved." "Things resolved." A pause. "She okay?" "She's okay." The envelope did what it was supposed to do. It did. Nathan watched the city go past. "You were right that something was wrong." "I'm usually right that something's wrong," Marcus said, with the dry weariness of a man who'd spent a career being right about things he'd rather be wrong about. "It's not a gift I'd recommend. Victoria Sterling wants to compensate you for the intelligence work." Silence for a moment. That's not why I know it's not why. She knows it's not why. She wants to anyway." Another pause. "I'll think about it." "Think about it somewhere with better coffee than that diner," Nathan said. "I'll be in touch." He ended the call and put the phone in his pocket. The cab crossed the bridge into Brooklyn. The water below was invisible in the dark, but he knew it was there. He'd crossed this bridge enough times that the absence of something visible didn't mean the absence of the thing. You learned that, if you paid attention long enough. The driver asked him something about the Knicks. Nathan gave an opinion he didn't particularly hold, and the driver agreed with it enthusiastically, and they talked about basketball for 4 minutes, which was a completely ordinary conversation at 1 in the morning on a bridge in January, and Nathan found himself grateful for the ordinariness of it, in a way that was hard to explain but didn't need explaining. He paid the fare and tipped generously because the driver had been pleasant and the night had been long, and those two facts together seemed like reason enough. He walked to his building, took the stairs, let himself in quietly. The apartment was dark and warm. He stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. Nothing. The specific quality of silence that means a child is sleeping deeply somewhere nearby. He went to Emma's room and stood in the doorway. She was on her side with Mr. Rabbit under her arm, and her mouth slightly open the way she slept, her hair across the pillow in the chaotic arrangement it always ended up in by morning. He watched her for about a minute. Didn't do anything with the minute, didn't think anything particularly organized, just stood there and let the reality of her existence do what it always did, which was to put everything else in its correct proportion. Then he went to the kitchen. He moved quietly, habit. He filled a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink, looking out the small window at the alley below, the ordinary nighttime view of a Brooklyn apartment. A street light, a fire escape, a dumpster, a cat. He opened the drawer next to the stove, under the takeout menus. The envelope was there, his handwriting on the front, Emma, in the careful letters of someone who'd written something difficult and wanted the recipient to know it mattered. He picked it up, turned it over, put it back, left it where it was. He drank the rest of the water and rinsed the glass and went to bed, and his shoulder complained only until he found the right position, and then it stopped, and the night was quiet, and Nathan Drake slept. The audit took 3 weeks. Nathan came to the Sterling Crown every morning at 8 and left every afternoon at 2:30, which gave him 45 minutes to get back to Brooklyn in time for the 3:15 pickup. He worked out of a temporary office on the 4th floor, a windowless room that had previously been used for equipment storage and still smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solution, and he worked alone, which was how he'd asked to work and how Victoria had agreed to let him. The first week was documentation. Every access credential issued under Cole's tenure, every security protocol written, approved, or modified during his 9 years as director. Every contract with every external vendor, the camera maintenance company, the radio system provider, the background check firm used for hiring. Nathan read everything with the particular patience of someone who understands that the most important thing in a document is often not what it says, but what it doesn't say. The gaps between clauses, the permissions that had been granted without explicit justification, the renewal authorizations that had moved through approval with signatures but without scrutiny. What he found was not a single dramatic betrayal, but something more insidious, a slow erosion. Cole had been careful. He hadn't built his position all at once. He'd made small adjustments over years, each one defensible in isolation, each one expanding his personal control over some narrow piece of the system in ways that wouldn't register as concerning unless you looked at the full picture simultaneously. The camera maintenance contract had been quietly renegotiated to route through a vendor with whom Cole had an undisclosed relationship. The radio system's secondary channels, the ones that had been jammed on the night of the gala, had been moved to a configuration that Cole controlled exclusively, framed as a security upgrade. The background check firm he'd chosen 4 years ago had a history of producing clean reports on candidates with troubling histories, if the fee structure was right. None of it was obvious. All of it was deliberate. Nathan put it in the report exactly as he found it, including the 2 instances where Victoria's own approval signature appeared on documents that had been presented to her in ways designed to obscure their actual implications. He flagged both clearly, noted the framing Cole had used, and wrote alongside them. Authorization obtained under incomplete disclosure. Standard approval process exploited, not negligence on the part of the approving party, but process gap that requires structural correction. He could have left the framing softer. He didn't. The report needed to be what it was. He gave it to Victoria on a Thursday afternoon, printed and in a folder, and sat across from her while she read it. She read the whole thing, 41 pages, all of it, without stopping, which took her about an hour, during which she asked for coffee twice and didn't touch either cup. When she finished, she closed the folder and set it on the desk with a care that suggested she was managing something she didn't want to show. "The two approval instances," she said. "Yes." He walked me through both of those personally, in my office. He had supporting documentation, context, reasons. "I know. It's in the report. The framing he used, the documents he showed you. They were real documents. He just arranged them so that what they actually authorized wasn't visible in the version of the conversation he was steering." Victoria looked at the closed folder. "So I signed things I didn't understand." "You signed things you weren't given enough information to understand. That's different." "Is it?" "Yes." He said it without softening it, because softening it would have been a form of dishonesty, and she hadn't asked him to be dishonest. "You trusted someone whose job was to give you complete information. He gave you curated information. The failure is his. The lesson is about what complete disclosure needs to look like structurally, so that one person's integrity isn't the only thing standing between the system working and the system being manipulated." She sat with this for a moment. "That's a hard lesson." "Most useful ones are." She opened the folder again and turned to the last section, the recommendations. Nathan had spent the better part of the third week on this section because the audit findings were what they were, but the architecture of what came next was something he'd actually cared about getting right. It was one thing to document how a system had been corrupted. It was another to design something that made the same corruption genuinely difficult the next time around. Not impossible. He'd been honest about that too. No system is impossible to corrupt if someone with sufficient access and sufficient patience decides to try. But difficult, costly, detectable, early, that was achievable. "The dual authorization requirement for all vendor contract renewals," Victoria said, reading. "No single person should be able to renew a contract that they themselves negotiated. Separation of approval authority. The independent audit cycle. External firm, rotated every 3 years so they don't develop the kind of familiarity that becomes blindness. Scope includes all access credentials, all system configurations, all vendor relationships. And this," she tapped a page, "the disclosure requirement for all senior security staff. Quarterly personal financial disclosure reviewed by an independent compliance officer." Cole's relationship with the camera maintenance vendor was undisclosed because nobody was looking for it. That's a structural gap, not a moral failure of monitoring. Build the disclosure into the job. Some people are going to find that invasive. "Some people should find it invasive," Nathan said. "That's the point. If someone in a position of security authority has a financial relationship they don't want disclosed, that's information the company needs." Victoria looked at him. "You've thought about this a lot." "For about 3 weeks, yes." Something in her expression said. She looked down at the report again, but with a different quality to it. Not processing information anymore. Something more personal than that. "When I hired you," she said slowly, "I was thinking about the operational piece. The gaps Cole left, the vendors, the protocols. I was thinking practically." She paused. "I wasn't thinking about what it means to build something that's worth trusting." Nathan waited. "This report," she touched the folder. "This isn't just what was wrong. It's a whole argument about how security should work. What it's actually for." She looked up. "That's not what I asked you for. I asked you for an audit." "You asked me to help rebuild it," he said. "That requires knowing what it's supposed to be before you can build it." She nodded slowly. "I'm approving all of it," she said. "Every recommendation. Full implementation. Some of it will take time." "Then it takes time." She closed the folder with a finality that meant the decision was made and she wasn't going to revisit it. "I want you to oversee the implementation, not just the audit, the actual rebuild. Walk it through until it's done." Nathan had been expecting this. He'd been thinking about his answer for about a week. "I'll see it through," he said. "But I want Park involved. The young one Mercer mentioned, she's green but she's sharp. She should be learning this from the ground up, not inheriting a finished product she didn't build." Victoria nodded. "Done." "And Mercer," Nathan added. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Mercer. He made real mistakes the night of the gala. He also corrected them under pressure, which is harder than not making them in the first place. He understands the building, the staff, the culture. That's not nothing. Nathan met her look. He needs to relearn some things, he knows that, but cutting him loose wastes what he's actually good at. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Nathan could see her working through it, the part that wanted to make a clean break from everything that night had touched, versus the part that was practical enough to know clean breaks are usually more about emotion than wisdom. I'll talk to him, she said finally. That's all I'm asking. She stood, which meant the meeting was over in the way that Victoria's meetings ended. A decision made, a path established, the forward motion already beginning. Nathan stood too and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Nathan, she said it with enough weight that he paused. The letter of engagement, the formal consulting agreement, legal has it ready. I want you to look at it and tell me if there's anything that needs adjusting. I'll look at it this week. Take your time. She almost added something else. He could see it in the half-second pause. And then she didn't, and he didn't ask what it was. He put his jacket on and left. The hallway outside was one of the hotel's working corridors, carpet, institutional lighting, the low hum of the building's machinery somewhere below and above. A housekeeper with a cart passed him, nodded, moved on. An administrative assistant came out of an office door with a phone to her ear, gave him a small wave that indicated they'd been sharing a hallway for 3 weeks, and had established a minimal but genuine familiarity. 3 weeks in this building, and he'd started to know its rhythms. The particular way the elevator on the left was slower than the one on the right. The fact that the fourth-floor coffee machine made better espresso than the one in the executive suite because someone had calibrated it correctly at some point, and nobody had touched it since. The security staff rotation, the new hires, the veterans, the ones who took their jobs seriously, and the ones who were going through motions. He knew more about the Sterling Crown than most people who worked there. He collected his bag from the storage room that had been his office, locked the door out of habit, even though there was nothing in it worth locking away, and took the slower elevator down. In the lobby, he stopped. Something had changed over 3 weeks in a way he hadn't fully noticed until this moment, the way changes accumulate gradually and then become visible all at once. The security staff in the lobby, 2 of them visible from where he stood, were positioned differently than they'd been on the night he walked in with the envelope. Not dramatically differently, but their orientation relative to the room, the angles they covered, the particular way they were attending to the space rather than simply occupying it, that had shifted. Mercer had been working on it. Nathan had given him a written summary of the tactical failures he'd observed on the night of the gala, and Mercer had read it and asked 2 follow-up questions and then gone quiet for a couple of days and then started changing things without being asked. The man near the east corridor, a hire Nathan didn't recognize from the night of the gala, someone new, had his badge on the correct side, right chest. Nathan noticed this in the way you notice small things that have personal history attached to them. He walked toward the main doors. Mr. Drake. He turned. It was the woman from the front desk, not the night staff, the day shift supervisor, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the hotel for 11 years and had the particular competence of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by very little. She was holding a small envelope. Ms. Sterling asked me to give you this, Patricia said. She said you'd know what it was. Nathan took it. It was sealed, which made him feel something that might have been amusement if it had been slightly less complicated. He thanked her and walked out through the lobby doors into the February air. It was colder than January had been, which was February's usual trick. He stood on the sidewalk and opened the envelope. Inside was a single card. On it, in Victoria's handwriting, more casual than he'd expected, the handwriting of someone who wrote quickly when they weren't being observed. It said, "The fence post. Send me the bill." He read it twice. Then he put it in his jacket pocket and he walked to the corner to find a cab. And something in his chest did the thing it does when something small and human arrives at exactly the right moment and lands in exactly the right place. And he didn't try to name it because naming it would have made it smaller than it was. The settlement of the criminal case against Damian Cole took 4 months. His attorney had advised him correctly. With the recorded confession, the physical evidence from the hotel, the financial documentation tracing the offshore structure he'd built over 3 years to receive the project transfer, and the testimony of 6 individuals, including Victoria, Mercer, and Detective Hargrove, the evidentiary position was not one that favored a prolonged trial. Cole entered a negotiated plea in April that included 12 counts spanning conspiracy, extortion, corporate fraud, and procurement corruption. The sentencing came in June. Nathan wasn't in the courtroom. He read about it the same evening from a brief news article that Victoria texted him without comment. The notification itself was the commentary. Cole received 8 years. Possibility of earlier release contingent on cooperation with ongoing investigations into the broader network that had been planning to receive the Meridian Project transfer. He was 51. He would be eligible for release at 59 if he cooperated, 63 if he didn't. Nathan sat with this for a while on the evening he read it. Not satisfaction exactly, but something that resembled the particular settling feeling of a thing that has been incomplete finally becoming complete. 8 years was not a small consequence. It was also not equivalent to 9 years of systematic betrayal of a trust that had been given genuinely. Those two facts coexisted without resolving each other, which was how justice usually worked in the real world. Not a precise equation, but an approximation, the best the available instruments could do. He thought about Cole's face in the parking structure, the brief tiredness that had passed across it. The plan evolved, as if the evolution had been something that happened to him rather than something he'd chosen incrementally over years, until the choosing had become invisible to him. Nathan had seen that before, the way a decision that would have been clearly wrong at the beginning becomes normalized through repetition until it stops feeling like a decision at all and starts feeling like simply the way things are. It wasn't a mystery, exactly. It was just one of the more reliable ways that people went wrong, and one of the harder ones to recognize from the inside. He put the article down and went to help Emma with her homework, which was multiplication tables, and was causing her the kind of focused frustration that only mathematics and injustice produce in 7-year-olds. Marcus Hale resurfaced in March. He called Nathan on a Saturday morning while Nathan was in the backyard losing the ongoing war with the fence post, and they talked for 20 minutes. About the case, about Cole's plea, about Marcus's current situation, which he described as comfortable and quiet, and let's not discuss the specifics. Nathan told him about Victoria's offer to compensate him, and Marcus was quiet for a long enough moment that Nathan could hear the ambient sound of wherever he was, traffic, distant, the suggestion of a city. "I don't need money from her," Marcus said finally. "I know, she knows. She still wants to do something." Another pause. "Tell her to put it toward the employees who got hurt that night, the ones who twisted ankles and went home scared, company wellness fund or whatever they call it." Nathan relayed this to Victoria on Monday. She set up a designated fund by Wednesday and seeded it with an amount she didn't tell Nathan and Nathan didn't ask about. He told Marcus. Marcus said, "Good." And that was the end of it. The Meridian Development Project broke ground in September. Nathan read about it in a business publication that he wouldn't normally have read, but that someone had left in the hotel's 4th-floor break room during a week when he was back in the building for a follow-up review of the new security protocols. The article described it as a landmark mixed-use development, significant in scale, significant in what it represented for the company. It described Victoria Sterling in terms that were accurate but that captured, Nathan thought, only the visible parts of her, the professional record, the company history, the achievement. What the article didn't mention was a parking structure in January, and a folding table with a single document on it, and the particular steadiness of a woman who had every reason to be afraid and chose to keep recording anyway. Those were the parts that actually mattered. They just didn't have a place in the public version. The fence post got fixed in April. Not by Nathan, or not by Nathan alone. He'd been struggling with it on a Saturday morning when his neighbor's teenage son, a 16-year-old named Derek, who moved through the world with the particular energy of someone who doesn't yet know what he's good at, materialized at the fence line and said he'd helped his uncle do this exact thing last summer, and did Nathan want an extra set of hands? They worked on it for 2 hours. Derek knew more about fence post installation than Nathan did, which Nathan acknowledged openly, and Derek received this acknowledgement with the visible satisfaction of someone who doesn't get told they know things very often. They finished. The post was solid. Nathan paid Derek $40, which Derek tried to decline and Nathan insisted on, and they shook hands at the fence line like two adults who'd done a job together. Emma watched from the back steps with the serious assessment of a child evaluating work quality. "It looks straight," she said finally. "It is straight," Derek said. "It wasn't before," she said, with the frank historical accuracy of someone who had watched the previous post lean for 8 months. Derek laughed. Nathan paid him the $40. That evening, Nathan sat in the backyard after Emma was in bed. The air was mild the way April air is when it's decided to cooperate. The new fence post stood at its correct angle, neither remarkable nor invisible, simply doing what it was supposed to do. He thought about what a person is made of, when you get past the credentials and the titles and the external measurements. He'd spent years in environments that stripped those things away. The military has a way of reducing a person to their actual components fairly quickly, because the situations that reveal character don't ask permission before arriving. He'd seen people with impressive resumes fold under pressure, and he'd seen people with nothing on paper find something in themselves that held. The two groups didn't predict each other. That was the thing that took the longest to really understand. That the resume and the person were different documents. Ryan Mercer was 3 months into a security retraining program that he'd enrolled in himself without being asked. Nathan knew this because Park had mentioned it. Ewan Park, the green hire who had become, over the past several months, quietly one of the most attentive students Nathan had worked with. She had the specific quality of paying attention to everything and saying less than she knew, which in Nathan's experience was a combination worth more than most formal credentials. She told him that Mercer had asked her to run drills with him on her days off, that he was studying the tactical frameworks Nathan had put in the security rebuild plan, reading them the way someone reads something they intend to actually use rather than archive. Is he different? Nathan had asked her. Park had thought about this with the seriousness she brought to everything. He's the same, she said, just less defended about it. Nathan had understood exactly what she meant. He sat in the backyard until the cold started returning, the way it does in April, when the evening remembers what month it actually is, and then he went inside. He made tea. He stood at the kitchen counter and drank it, looking out the small window at the streetlight and the fire escape and the ordinary nighttime geography of his block. He opened the kitchen drawer, under the takeout menus. The envelope was still there, his handwriting on the front. Emma. In the letters he'd chosen carefully because he'd wanted her to know, if she ever had to read it, that it had been written with attention. He picked it up. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the paper and the ink and the 7 years of love that had gone into the words inside it. Then he walked to the recycling bin. He held it over the bin for a second, not hesitating, just acknowledging the moment for what it was. And he let it go. It landed at the bottom of the bin with a small sound that was entirely ordinary and meant everything. He rinsed his teacup, turned off the kitchen light, went down the hall. Emma's room. The sound of her breathing, steady and deep, and Mr. Rabbit still under her arm the way it always was. He stood in the doorway for the amount of time it took to feel certain, which was not very long. He went to bed. The thing about the letter was this. He had written it because he'd believed, somewhere in the part of himself that had spent years in situations where the margin was thin and the outcomes were not guaranteed, that the most responsible thing a person in his position could do was prepare for the worst. Leave the words in case the words were needed. Make sure she would know, in the event that he wasn't there to tell her himself. That was a reasonable instinct. It wasn't wrong. But he'd carried the letter for 2 years past the point where carrying it was about preparation and into the territory where it was about something else. About not quite believing that the ordinary, quiet 315 life he'd built was something he was allowed to fully inhabit. As if there was always going to be one more situation, one more envelope, one more parking structure. Maybe there would be. He didn't know the future. Nobody did. But the letter in the drawer had been a way of keeping 1 foot outside the life he'd chosen, of hedging against his own presence in it. And some things you have to throw away before you can fully arrive at where you are. He understood this the way he'd understood a lot of things in the past year. Not through reasoning, but through the accumulation of evidence. Marcus in the diner, sliding an envelope across. Emma's drawings of horses. The way Mercer had looked in the lobby versus the way he'd looked putting himself between the fourth man and Victoria. Cole's face going briefly tired. Victoria's handwriting on a card. The fence post. Send me the bill. People kept teaching him things. That was the part of it he hadn't expected. Not the crisis of January, not the audit, not the work. The part where other people kept showing up and being themselves, imperfect and complicated and occasionally surprising, and he kept learning something from the encounter. He was still figuring out how to let that in fully, how to be a person in a regular life, and not always the person standing between the regular life and the thing that wants to disrupt it. Those were not incompatible roles, he'd come to believe that, but they required different kinds of attention, and keeping both of them in correct proportion was the ongoing work. He was better at it than he'd been in January. He expected he'd be better at it in another year than he was now. The morning after he threw away the letter, he picked Emma up from school at the usual time. She came out of the building with her backpack half unzipped the way it always was, and something in her hand that turned out to be a drawing she'd made in art class. A horse, significantly more controlled than the giraffe, the neck maintaining its intended length all the way to the head. "That's good," Nathan said, looking at it properly. "You got the legs right." "Mrs. Okafor showed us about proportions," Emma said, taking the drawing back and examining it with the critical eye of someone who knows the difference between the thing they made and the thing they were trying to make. "The back legs are still a little wrong. They look right to me." "They're a little wrong," she said, with the firm patience of someone correcting a well-meaning but uninformed opinion. She put the drawing carefully in her backpack. "Can we get soup?" "There's soup at home." "Different soup, the kind from the place." The place was a Vietnamese restaurant 3 blocks from the school that Emma had decided, 18 months ago, was the correct restaurant for all situations. Nathan had no particular argument with this. They walked the 3 blocks through the afternoon, the specific quality of light that comes in the late part of a school day in spring, long and golden and slightly tired, the way all light seems at the end of something. Emma talked about the horse drawing and then about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Cora about whether unicorns would be better or worse than regular horses if they were real, which was a question Nathan gave a genuine opinion on and which generated a follow-up discussion that lasted the full 3 blocks and had not resolved by the time they reached the restaurant. They sat at the small table by the window that was their usual table. They ordered soup. The restaurant was warm and smelled like broth and something with lemongrass, and the woman who ran the counter, Mrs. Nguyen, who had known them for 18 months and had formed a strong opinion of Emma based on the quality of Emma's ability to describe what she wanted, brought them their drinks without being asked, because by now she already knew. Nathan sat across from his daughter and watched her tell him, with the total commitment of someone for whom this is the most important conversation currently happening in the world, why a unicorn would be strictly worse than a regular horse, because the horn would make it difficult to lower its head to eat grass, and that would create significant problems. He listened to all of it. He asked a follow-up question about whether the horn angle could be adjusted, which Emma considered seriously before ruling it out on structural grounds. The soup arrived. They ate. Outside the window, the street did what streets do, moved, shifted, carried its 10,000 ordinary stories past the glass without stopping. Nathan Drake was 37 years old and ate soup with his daughter and had work he believed in and a fence post that now stood straight and a kitchen drawer that was lighter than it had been the night before. I was a man with a past that had cost him real things, and a present that he was, for the first time in a while, not treating as a temporary arrangement. He was not a hero in the way stories talk about heroes, clean, purposeful, arriving at exactly the right moment with exactly the right answer. He'd caught his hip on a chair in a darkened ballroom and stumbled. He'd carried a letter for 2 years past its usefulness. He'd drunk 2 cups of bad coffee and 1 cup of good coffee and given a statement that took 90 minutes and answered the same questions 4 different ways for a detective who was doing his job properly. He'd walked into a building with an envelope and done what he could with what he had. That was the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. Not the grand version, but the actual one, which is smaller and more human and harder to explain, and for that reason, the only version worth anything. The soup was good. Emma was wrong about the unicorns, in his opinion, but he kept this to himself because she'd made her case well and deserved to win the argument she'd built, and some disagreements are better held quietly than resolved loudly. He paid the check. They walked home. He held her hand at the corner where the traffic didn't always stop, the way he always had, the way he expected he always would. The evening came in the way evenings do in spring, gradually, without announcement, the light changing its quality before it changes its quantity, so that you're inside the dusk before you notice it arrived. He did not think about what came next. He was here. That was enough for tonight.